So, now we get to start a new series, The Search. And if you haven't figured it out, that's the very first fill in the blank. Everyone's searching for something. We jump right into it. Everyone's searching for something. It doesn't matter whether you're a mom or a dad, whether you're old, whether you're young. Everyone is searching for something. Maybe you've never thought about it in this way, but we're all looking for something. We're all looking for that it. What is it? That thing that brings us excitement, that brings us satisfaction, that maybe makes us feel good or it tastes good going down our throat as we're eating something really quite yummy, right? We're all looking for something that brings us value, something that connects our life story to something important, something that satisfies. There's always something we're looking for. And the interesting piece about this, the thing we're searching for is often the missing part of our story. We tell ourselves about ourselves. I need this to feel complete. This is the second thing that's true of everyone in this room. Everyone's searching for something, but you have a story you tell yourself about yourself. You have a story you tell yourself about yourself. It's the last thing you think of when you're drifting to sleep. As you fall asleep, something pops in your mind. It's the first thing you think of when you wake up. It's the interactions you have with people in your life. When you have a conversation with them and you walk away and you start doubting about who you were in that moment. Right? You have a story you tell yourself about yourself. Did I sound like I was educated? Did I leave a good impression? Right? Did I maybe hurt their feelings? We think about that. We go to an interview with a boss, and we have a moment, or a future boss, and we wonder, did I say the right things? Am I qualified for this job? We all have these things that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And the interesting thing for me, when I've been trying to walk through life figuring out who I am, I had to come to this place where I realized there's a difference between what I do and who I am. And in my search, I've been multiple times stuck with what I do, thinking that is who I am. So at one point in my life, I considered myself to be an athlete. I considered myself to be a sports lover. As an adult now, I realize I just like hockey, right? And you said, okay, Phil's a jock. If you had met me at a different point, I played basketball, I played, not real well, I played football, played hockey, I even played volleyball and baseball, almost all at the same time when I was younger. You would have thought Phil is a jock. But then at the same time, I was in a band, and I played with a group, and we toured across Canada, and I played bass guitar just like James was here today, and singing, and I got into it. I was in the band in school. I actually played clarinet. That's a public confession. Yeah. So you would have looked at me and said, okay, Phil's a musician, right? He's a music artsy type. And then actually, if you've actually heard me play or some of the songs I've written, you say he's not that artsy. But along with that, you would find that I grew up on a farm. I like working on trucks. I would work on vehicles. I like big tires. I'm glad people drive Priuses so that I don't have to. Like, that is the redneck side of me, right? I remember one of the most exciting moments in my life is when one of the older guys from my church back home bought a junkyard car, painted a number on the side, and then would rally around the fields like Dukes of Hazzard. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. So you're like, okay, Phil is a redneck. And then there's this other piece of me that loves J.R.R. Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Yeah, C.S. Lewis and Chronicles of Narnia. I'm super nerdy. In fact, I went to Salt Lake Comic-Con a few years ago, and I was like, this is amazing. If you're a people watcher, that's a great place to go. So you'd say Phil is a nerd. And that's what we end up doing. We're searching for something, and we tell ourselves a story about ourselves. In my case, these were like 4 different identities that if you were in any sort of high school drama experience, not like drama, but like actual drama, like energy, emotions, girls flailing hands kind of stuff. If you were in any sort of experiences, we decide that people fit into these categories. This is who they are. And we come to this place where we've all been in that situation. And the statement we come to, if we are honest with ourselves, is we're saying, I am searching for identity. I am searching for identity. Right? When we think about ID, we think about our license that shows a picture of ourselves when we give it to the police officer the first time we've been pulled over. Not that I've ever experienced that. Okay, yes, I have. I feel like I shared a story on that a while ago. But I have this understanding is that our identity is much bigger than just a picture or a description. Our identity is much different than the things we do. Our identity is built on so much more than simple things that are just actions or simple things that humanity can take away from us. Right? So I tell you, I'm a jock, I'm an athlete. For a lot of us men that in our younger years, and you go, Phil, you are pretty young. That's fine, thank you. You can go ahead and say that, that's fine. We may have been much better athletes than we are today. So if our ability to be an athlete has been taken away from us, then does that mean our identity has been taken away from us? If I'm a piano player and identify as a musician and I break all my fingers and they don't work anymore, who am I? It's a tough question. And there's something that there's basically 4 questions that we can look at today, or 4 statements fill in the blank that will really tell us a lot about who we think our identity is. And quite often we wrap it up into these 4 things, and they all start with the letter P. This isn't a fill in the blank, but they deal with our possessions, they deal with our performance, they deal with our pain, and they deal with people in our lives. Okay? Possession, performance, pain, and people. So we're going to look at those. So you fill in the blank, and you tell me if this is something you maybe identify with. This has been your experience. So the first one, something happens to you. Don't worry about it. At least I still have money, a friend, my health. We've been in that case where we're trying to figure out who we are. We're looking at identity. Don't worry about it. At least I still have you fill in that blank. What does that say about you? Whatever you put there is a clue to the story you tell yourself. I'm curious, you think about this. How would you fill it in? The next one, this one says, if I was better at, fill in the blank, my life would be better. This might be an ability, a performance, marriage. Oh, here's a harsh one, parenting. If I was a better parent, my life would be better. If I was a better husband, my life would be better. If I was a better mechanic, I'd drive a bigger four-wheeler. Right? And when we look at that, we start looking at would our life be better? Is this a story we tell ourselves if this was the case? But so many of us do this. The next one, because I went through, fill in the blank, my life will always be controlled by it. Some of you don't walk around with crutches, but you've experienced some pretty severe pain in your life, and you might as well be. Because there's a handicap that you're living with because of some sort of painful experience you've had, right? And because you went through that, you now decide, my life will always be controlled by it. I am who I am because of this circumstance, right? Where does identity come from? Or how about this one? The people in your life become the people who are writing the story for you. They tell you who you are. Maybe you fill in the blank. As long as I'm loved by this person, life is lovely. So there's a gal who I found on a TED Talk named Brene Brown. She's actually the most watched TED Talk I think that's ever been. And she had a Netflix special. I recommend watching it. It's really good, really, really interesting. She's a researcher, storyteller. But she's done a lot of understanding humanity and how we deal with vulnerability, how we deal with empathy, sympathy, and how we actually identify ourselves. And in her Netflix special, I'm just going to read this. Brene Brown shared a personal example of a time when she was swimming in a lake with her husband. They were just out doing something. She reached out with a heartfelt comment about how happy she was and how much she loved him. Her husband was totally unresponsive and dismissive, and she felt very hurt. It's like, honey, it's so good to be with you. And he's just like, straight-faced, nothing. So in the instance where she was there, she told herself these things, that she looked so awful in her bathing suit, that he was rejecting her because of that he didn't love her, he didn't care for her because he didn't respond. But as she dug into it, it turned out that her husband was having anxiety about his own ability to swim. So he didn't even hear that she had said that. But it's interesting when we look at her story and when she talks about like how she's had to work through this, is that was the story she told herself, is how does he see me is how I identify myself. She had to work through that. And this is actually pretty normal for our society. I would say it's not good, but this is the way we look at it. Here's a little equation for us. My performance and others' opinions equals my identity. My performance and others' opinions equals my identity. All of this is connected to a false belief. And it's this. The false belief is, I must meet certain standards to feel good about myself. That's pretty challenging. This leads us to fear failure above everything else, and it creates in us these three things that I think are very, very unhealthy. Number one, an unhealthy drive to succeed that leaves a wake of destruction in the relationships around us. We are so driven that we don't care who we hurt along the way. Two, this leads us to manipulate and use others to achieve success. Right? Because we have this fear of failure. This might cause us to withdraw from new opportunities, change, or fear healthy risk because we can't imagine not achieving something. Right? We don't want to identify ourselves in this place. We start believing our performance and others' opinions is who we are. And I don't need to convince you that this way of life is crushing. It's devastating. You're always losing. Right? But here's the hook. God offers us a better story. Jesus offers us such a different angle than this. It's so counterproductive to our society. I remember I grew up, first of all, in a church that I think was very, very God-centered, but sometimes I got lost in what they taught, and I felt maybe it was more about the things that I did versus what Jesus did. Right? We all end up in that place where we fall into religion, that we start believing Jesus didn't do enough, so I need to make up the difference. And I remember, not that my church taught me that, but that's just where I ended up. But I remember kind of learning about Jesus differently the first time. There was an author named Mike Yaconelli. He wrote a book called Messy Spirituality, and it's called, his little headline was God's Annoying Love for Imperfect People. I remember my first time reading that and reading through the stories of how God worked through different people in the Bible and sharing the stories a little bit more than I was taught in Sunday school, and seeing God in a different light, but especially seeing Jesus in a different light. And I love to share this thing because when I was in Sunday school as a kid, I knew the story of Noah's Ark and how he was a faithful man in the desert who built an ark, loved God, saved humanity, and then there's a rainbow and altar at the end of the story. Boom, go home, happy day. Good for you, Phil. But in Messy Spirituality, Mike Yaconelli just, all he did is he pointed at the scripture. It's like then Noah made himself a vineyard, made some wine, got drunk, and passed out naked. Right? I'm like, where was that in Sunday school? The part about Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma was a prostitute named Rahab who the Israelites visited when they came to Jericho. Where was that in Sunday school? We did a series called Heart, Mind, and Soul like a month back, and we see David, who's a man after God's own heart, who is a complete mess. He did absolutely ridiculous things, even murder and adultery, you name it. And yet, here's a man God used. And then we move forward to Jesus. We move forward to the man who comes down and he loved people. He was innocent. He offered a new story to everybody who have been let down by the stories they told themselves. He offered a new story for people who are in pain. He offered a new story for people who are trying to perform. He offered a new story for people who believe that their value and identity came from possessions. 4 people he collected with. And Matthew, these aren't up here, but Matthew the tax collector, who one of the Gospels, one of the stories of Jesus is named after, in chapter 9 through 13, he was a hated and despised person in his society, and Jesus walked up to him and said, you're not defined by their opinions. You're not defined by who they say you are. You're defined by who I say you are. He walks up to an adulterous woman who, well, he didn't walk up. She was thrown down in front of him, literally caught in the act, thrown down before him, John chapter 8, 1 through 11. And he says, you're not defined by that. You're not defined by who they say you are. You're not defined by having to perform and finding your value from other men. You're defined by who I say you are. Right? The woman at the well, the Samaritan, who the Jews weren't supposed to connect with, comes to him and she says, I don't have a husband. He's like, no, you don't have a husband. You have many husbands. But you're not defined by your performance, by what people say who you are. You're defined by who I say you are. And again, with the tax collector, we know Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10, was not well liked by normal people, the religious people. And yet Jesus said, I'm coming to your house to eat with you today, Zacchaeus. Jesus told a different story. He lived a different story. He came to those who are not perfect, who are not worthy, and said, you are worth my time, you are worth my sacrifice. That's what Jesus did. There were a group of people that also decided, as they saw his countercultural changing experience, that they weren't okay with it. And they said, we're done with this. And they tried to put Jesus in the grave, but he didn't stay there. He rose up for us. He allowed the pain, he allowed the hurt, he allowed the false identity to be killed with him when he died on the cross. And when he rose again, he conquered that, giving us a new story. The most incredible part is he offers his story to us so it can be our story. A story of brokenness, a story of hurt that is renewed and refreshed by a God, by a creator who loves us for the very brokenness that we have. So, my story is no longer built on what I do, but what Jesus did. So here's what it sounds like to make that story your story. We're going to look at Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. We're going to look at this verse just pretty intensely because it's actually written by somebody whose story was changed from the inside out. This is Paul, the apostle. He wrote, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Now, as he's writing this, he's not literally crucified. He's identifying that his life, his need to be identified in performance, possessions, people, pain, is crucified and dies with Jesus. He's identifying that I have been crucified with Christ and I no longer live. He's not saying I'm done. He's not suicidal. He's literally saying I am transferring my identity to someone else. Why? Because Christ lives in me. The life I now live in this body, the life I live on this earth, I live in the faith that the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. I live in faith that what Jesus did is enough. What Jesus did paid the price. I have nothing more to add to that. I've been given this gift. Now, the interesting about Paul, who wrote that, is he was a person who hated Jesus. This man who wrote these words, he walked around and built his identity on being a really good Pharisee who put Jews in jail and oversaw them being killed. His story, he told himself, is, I am finding value by being a good Jew, by stomping out this Jesus fellow. And it's super interesting to me that in this story, he found himself a new story through Jesus, where Jesus says, whoa, what are you doing? What are you doing? This isn't what your value is in it. Stop that. Stop that. Your value is in me. I paid the price for even the ridiculous things you're doing right now to my people. That's a pretty intense thing right there when we think about that. When we read this verse and we think about the man who said this was an enemy of Jesus not much long before that. In his life, he was the enemy, and yet Jesus said, no, I'm here for you. Right? If we want to understand this a little bit more, we can look at Romans chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into his grace, which we now stand, and we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Since we have been justified through faith, we now have peace. We talk about joy and freedom all the time. Joy and freedom come with peace, right? We've been justified. We now have access to God. right? Access means that with our connection to Jesus, we have the ability to step into a relationship with him. We have this free gift given to us. And the thing that people need to understand is we often feel like we have to be justified by other people's opinions. We feel like we have to be justified by the way we live. Sometimes we feel like we have to be justified by religion, right? No, Jesus, I know you said you got this, but I got this. You just stay over there. Let me show you how good of a believer I am by all the good, amazing things I do. And we justify ourselves by this standard that we think we have to set because what Jesus didn't do isn't good enough. Now, we wouldn't come right out and say that, but in reality, that's the place sometimes we put ourselves. We look at other people's opinions, their performance, their reputation, their pain, and their stuff, and we say we're justified by what we did in that. But that's in contrast to Christ justifying us. Justified before people is different than being justified before God. Now, there's a word that we like to use for this, and it's justification. And justification literally means there's no guilt with it. There's no memory of past sin. It's more than forgiveness. Justification means that we are simultaneously declared forgiven and righteous. And since we are righteous and we are pleasing to God, his opinion of us is the same as his opinion of Jesus. Because we're justified by Jesus, God's opinion of us is the same as his opinion of Jesus. Sometimes that's hard for us to understand because we continually put ourselves back in the place where we're building our identity on our worldview, on our worldly experience, on the things that we do, on actions that we take, on behaviors that we have, on people's opinions of us, on the way our life looks like in the American dream. Right? The pursuit of happiness. My identity is built on how happy I am. Again, we fall to this place where we're recognizing we're justified by God. Robert S. McGee says it this way: justification means that God not only has forgiven me of my sins, but also has granted me the righteousness of Christ. Because of justification, I bear Christ's righteousness, and I am therefore fully pleasing to the Father. There's two statements that I like to say, right? All we are is a group of sinners justified by Christ, right? And that's such an amazing gift that Jesus gives us. All we are is a group of sinners justified by Christ. And there's another one that I like. It's really simple. It's maybe kind of Sunday schoolish, but I love this phrase: is Jesus died for that too. That doesn't mean I take advantage of that, but I recognize my failures and I recognize I make mistakes. I get to recognize that Jesus died for that too. So as a believer, when I find myself falling back into the religion trap again, trying to perform, because I'm maybe not praying enough, I'm not reading my Bible enough, well, for me it's a little different because my attendance at church is pretty good. But maybe I'm not going to church enough. I fall myself and I'm also not good enough. And I'm telling myself these lies. I get to remember that Jesus died for that too. And I get to come back to him and recognize I've been forgiven. So we talked about the performance trap, but let me explain how justification frees us from this trap. Here's our next point. This is the gospel truth. Jesus' performance and God's opinion, that equals my identity. Jesus' performance, not mine, and God's opinion, that equals my identity. When we think about Paul in the New Testament, he's writing all these scriptures, but he says we boast in the hope that we are loved by God. We boast in the gift that he's given us. We boast because our identity is found in our Creator, the Creator of the universe, the Creator of all mankind, the Creator of everything we know, our existence. We are completely loved by and valued by him. This is a thing that I would say most of us are searching for, whether we realize it or not. We're searching for significance. We're searching for our identity to mean something. And the promise I will make you, that there is nothing on this earth that will fulfill your identity when it comes to significance. Our significance only comes from our Creator. the one who purposed us, the one who made us the way he thought was fit, when he designed you with intention, with purpose. The part that I look at this when I say, if we are searching for significance in this life, we will find ourselves back into the lie identity that says our performance in other people's opinions is where our identity comes from, and that's never satisfying. In fact, it's almost most always damaging. But the gospel truth, when Jesus' performance, what he did on the cross, the price he paid, plus God's opinion of us, that's our identity, then we know where we stand. We know where we walk in this life. Our series thesis says this. This is a 3-week series on the search. Before you started searching, God was searching for you. Now, Matthew 18, verse 12, this is a story that Jesus shares to tell us how important he thinks of us, where he's talking about a shepherd who has a flock of sheep, and one of the sheep takes off. And this is what Jesus says about that. If any man has 100 sheep, and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go search for the one that is straying? Right? Does Jesus not come after us? Before you started searching, God was searching for you. If you would say that your story includes you going astray, then this series is an invitation to stop searching and be found. Be found by the one who found you. Whether you realize it or not, he already knows where you are. He already knows who you are. He already knows the things that you're struggling with. He already knows the lies you're believing about your identity and where you're trying to find your significance outside of him. He knows that. He doesn't care. He still wants you. He leaves the 99 looking for you. So 4 things in response to the possessions, the performance, the people, and the pain. When your story has been written by Jesus and not your performance, your life will always be significant. Right? When your story has been written by Jesus and not your pain, your life will always matter. When your story has been written by Jesus and not people, your life will never be lonely. That one's pretty significant. When your story is written by Jesus and not a person, you will always be loved. There's no other story like that. And here's a story when you find Jesus, when you allow him to be your identity, when you realize the price he paid was for you to be in connection with God. When we sit or stand and worship God and we sing these songs, we are recognizing a God who created us. And even though we're messy and imperfect, he doesn't stop loving us and he doesn't stop chasing us. And this is what Jesus offers us. First of all, an identity, this is the next slide here, an identity that our performance can't create or take away. Significant that it can't create or take away, because when we fail at a performance, we feel like we lose it, but then also we'll believe the lie that if we perform enough, we can create an identity. That's this whole thing that I say, when you build your identity on something you do that is built on this earth, if humankind can take it away from you, it's a bad thing to build your identity on. First answer right there. Jesus offers an identity that our performance can't create or take away. Next, an identity that pain can't create or take away. There is a lot of pain in this life. There's a lot of horrible experiences that we go through, that we walk through, that we watch our friends and family walk through. When I see prayer requests come into my email or my text, some of the stuff that people go through in this community right here breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. And we have the opportunity as people to build our identity on this victim experience. That now this is who I am. I am damaged goods. I no longer have value. I no longer have worth. I've been broken. I am not cared for. Pain more takes away than anything, but Jesus offers identity that pain can't create or take away. And the last one, he offers an identity that people can't create or take away. That one's a hard one for me. I care what people think. I have a life where I value other people's opinions, where what they think of me, what they share with me, can lift me up or bring me down. And I find myself slipping into places where I am now identifying myself by their view of me. Yeah, I know Jesus, he loved me, but Jeff Hubrick made fun of me during announcements. Now I'm making fun of him. That's a silly one, but in all reality, like, we have these experiences. Have you ever been in an argument with someone and they say some really mean things to you and you just feel your energy and your emotion just rise through the ceiling and you're just standing there and you just can't even figure out where to go next? In that moment, you've given them permission to decide who you are. I do that all the time. But Jesus creates an identity that people can't create or take away. And the fun thing, like I said before, is that when I find myself in those moments where I push Jesus out and I decide who I am based on other people's opinions, Jesus died for that too. And then he welcomes me back. So one of the things I like to say here that I've picked up from a church that I used to work at is full devotion to Jesus looks like this. I find delight in defining myself by what Jesus did, not what I do. There's two groups in this room. There are those of us who would say we are aligned and totally into Jesus, and there are some of us who are searching and maybe not sure. For those of you who are not sure and you're still kind of trying to figure out who Jesus is, and maybe you've seen Jesus in this performance trap where the only Jesus you've known, the only Jesus experience you have has been completely built on how acceptable you are to him by how well you perform. And if I'm honest with you, that just doesn't sound like a very interesting place to be. If it was the truth of God, then we'd be all out of luck. But the wonderful thing is it's not. The truth of Jesus is that our performance isn't what put him on the cross. What put him on the cross is our inability to perform, because he loves us and cares for us. So the thing that I want to share with you is, if you don't understand the joy and freedom that comes from having a relationship with Jesus, my challenge is it because it's been too much of a religion and performance and not built on who Jesus really is? Because the coolest thing about Jesus is this, is if you want to know what you're worth, all you have to do is choose him. Simple words. Jesus, I choose you today to make your story my story. That your performance has secured my righteous verdict before God. I get it now. That's my story. It's simple. Something like that. You say, Jesus, who you are, not who I am, who you did, not what I did. Your price has paid for me to be okay. It's okay to not be okay because of what Jesus did. It's that simple. And Jesus, if you pray that, if you believe that, you've stepped across the line. And you've now entered into a life where his story can be your story. For those of us who are believers, and we're fully all in on Jesus, we've locked in, we're locked and loaded, we got to ask ourselves this question: how often do we fail to trust Jesus with our identity? How often do we take back control? How often do we decide what is good and what is not good, what is righteous, what is not righteous, what is acceptable to Jesus versus what is acceptable to me? How often do we find ourselves in that place? My question for us when we're in that place is this: if you think of yourself differently than God thinks of you, who's mistaken, you or God? Yeah. The challenge for us is to go like, listen, our identity, our search for our identity comes from Jesus' justification of us, that he paid the price for us. When it comes to our church, when it comes to Lakeview, why we say joy and freedom is because joy is something that is given to us. Freedom is something that is given to us because of the price that Jesus paid, not because of anything we have done. That is the message that God has given us here at Lakeview, all of us. That's why we share it freely and openly. We share it freely and openly, even with the mistakes of our lives, the imperfect lives that we live, the horrible decisions that I make as a dad, as a husband, as a pastor, as a wannabe farmer. Jesus pays the price for all of those things. Right? My significance, my identity has to be in him. As we move forward as a church, why we're going to 2 services is built on this, is there's a lot of people in our community that don't know their value and worth is from Jesus. They don't know that's where their identity comes from. There is a lot of people out there searching. We have an opportunity as a church just to point them to Jesus. It's not about growing Lakeview. I am not really interested in being a big church pastor. I am really not looking forward to preaching twice a week. But we do it because Jesus' price that he paid for us, that is our significance, that is our identity, and we want to share that. We want to share the freedom and joy he's given us. I want to invite the band up as we're wrapping up here. But as we move forward as a church, I have to tell you, being here has been unbelievable. For most of you, if you don't know that we opened 3 months ago in 1 week. That's how long Lakeview's been around. And we're watching God just grab people's hearts day by day. Sometimes it's some of us who've been following him and aligned with him for a long time, and he's just saying, let me grab a hold of you my way, not your way. Sometimes it's some of us who are now just seeking him, just trying to pursue him and see what he has to say for us. And we're unsure. We don't know where he's taking us. I'm not quite good enough to just power through that when the worship leader who's been here with us for the last time says, it's my first time. Jesus died for that. My hope for us today as we go into this 3-week series is, what are we searching for? Today as we talk about our identity, as we examine where Jesus is leading us, he's calling to you. It doesn't matter who you are. You're searching for something. I'm willing to bet there's a piece of your life that's searching for significance. My promise is that you're not going to find it in religion. You're not going to find it in the world. You're going to find it in our Savior. That's the price he paid. That's the significance that we get to receive, where we get to replace our story with his story. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you so much for the opportunity to be here each week to worship you, to connect with you, to praise you with friends and family, with strangers. We all get to come together, see what you're up to, Lord. I know you're reaching into each one of our hearts, into our soul, trying to transform us from the inside out and bring us closer to you. God, I know it's messy. I know sometimes it's painful. I know sometimes it's challenging, the things we go through in this life. But I thank you that all along the way, you love us, you paid the price for us, we've been justified by you, and we get to live in your righteousness because of that. We are worthy because you say so. Thank you. We praise you. Amen.